Hello, I'm Eagle Gardens, Eagle Gardens 1 on Instagram. This is fucking talking shit with Eagle, uh, episode 243. Got an amazing guest for you tonight, Mr. Soul, Brothers Grimm Seeds. How you doing tonight? You want to tell us how you doing and where we can find you?
Hey, how are you, Eagle? I'm doing great. It's nice to be back on the show again. I've been, I think it's been over 6 months or so since I was on last time, and I really enjoyed talking with you then. Here we are again. So welcome to you too. And I guess this is episode 243. 3 episodes, you had 240. That's kind of like 420, but the numbers are just juggled around a little, right? So I'm a little bit beyond that episode, and it's November 2020, and we've all kind of suffered through this 2020 year of the pandemic and being isolated and socially distanced, and all of that going on. And I was reading where the pandemic has now taken about 250,000 lives, and they were comparing it to the wars that have existed, the wars that have transpired in the past, like the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and World War I combined didn't kill as many Americans as this plague has killed. And at the same time, you kind of feel, especially living as I do out in the country in Colorado on a farm, you don't know anybody who's gotten this disease, let alone has died from it. And it just feels like, where are all these people dying from? And it's a very strange time to live in. And I'm 61 years old, and I've lived through, the 60s, 70s, and so on, all the interesting years, the 80s, and so on. And we've had a lot of weird shit like AIDS, and we've had, diseases and plagues on our world, and it just seems like it keeps getting more serious, and the weirdness gets weirder. I would have never thought we'd have anything worse than like the scourge of AIDS or something like that that's plaguing the planet, and here we are locked down. Like you go to restaurants now and they have at least one table between your table and any other table, and there's all this space between people at a time when the population has just kept growing and growing, and you would think that like wherever you go, it's going to be more and more crowded until 2020 comes along, and all of a sudden everybody's springing apart from one another. It's just a strange time to be on the planet, isn't it? I mean, what's your experience been adapting to this time and the plague, and if I can call it that, the plague?
COVID-19, crazy, ups and downs. In the beginning of it, it's a funny fact. I never realized this until one of my guests brought it up. G13 from the UK. One episode, I announced that it was like 204, I believe it was, and he shows the headline from overseas there, and it says COVID now 204 days. The show's been going exactly long as the pandemic. Yeah. How crazy is that to match up just perfectly with this pandemic? But it's been pretty crazy.
That's the number of episodes. That's the number of episodes that you've had, not the number of days that you've been doing the podcast. Or is it?
Oh no, they're consecutive. Yeah, they're consecutive.
Oh, I see. You do a podcast every day.
Yeah.
I was not aware that you were the hardest working man in the podcast business. That's what it feels like.
I trying to stay pretty busy anyway. And I'd like
burning
to give
the
you
midnight oil. Yeah, I mean, you
were 30 episode 33. You were
that was
early on in this.
The last time was episode 30. Holy Christ, that's more than 6 months ago.
Yeah, and now again, thank you very much. You coming on helped, give the show some credibility, if you will.
Hey.
I've even heard that to this day. People that I've asked on, and they've looked through. They're like, well, Mr. Soul can do this.
Nice.
I could step into the rankings. So it did. It helped give the show some credibility, and Well,
Well,
thank you for showing your support early on.
I like doing podcasts, especially when there's a great host like yourself. You know, we can kick it back and forth. I can talk to people more at length. And I mean, I have my online presence. I'm Mr. Soul underscore C99 on Instagram, and I post a lot of my personal stuff, my photography. I like sunsets and the animals and the farm scenes and things like that, and parts of Colorado and what have you. And then Brothers Grimm Seeds is the other Instagram feed where you can follow things that are closer to like what's going on with Brothers Grimm and the strains we're creating and any specials that we might be running. The website might have a sale, or there's a coupon code for brothersgrimmseeds.com. And so, you know, there's that way that I'm interfacing with the world and the cannabis community. And at the same time, it's like, you know, Twitter, 140 characters, or they've expanded it since then. But, you know, I'm going back to the early days. But what my point, I guess, is that in social media, your presence is there, but it's in tiny bites and snippets that people don't really get a well-rounded, full picture of, you know, who is the personality behind this feed, who is this person on a deeper level, you know, where we can kick back and just talk for an hour, whatever length of time we're on. And it gives me a chance to answer questions, talk about, you know, events that are happening to me in my life more personally. And so I guess, you know, I'm just saying in a very long-winded way here that I do enjoy doing these shows. And in particular, you're a great guy. And I was happy to get back on the show with you because I remember having a pretty nice time just talking last time. And I think the name of your show is just kick ass, you know, talking shit with Eagle. That was a good idea to name it that.
Thank you. I mean, overall, how's things been for you on the COVID end of it all? I mean, if you were having to be trapped anywhere in the middle of the country, in the middle of that farm, with some cannabis, may not be a bad place to be stuck. I mean, if you have to be stuck.
I mean, I hate to make anybody feel, you know, badly in the sense that, you know, in a time of great hardship for many people in terms of their income and their lives being impacted by this lockdown and the restriction of our ability to interact with one another. Me personally, that affects me less, I think, in the bottom line of my life and my income and so on, because I'm in the cannabis business. And during this COVID-19 crisis, you'll notice that with everyone stuck home or working from home, you can imagine cannabis use has increased, if anything, not decreased. So people are buying my seeds, people are growing and getting into the hobby because they have the time and the circumstances to do that, I think. And so I would say many in the cannabis business haven't seen a huge reduction in what they were doing in terms of their income or the popularity of their business, and probably to the contrary, you know, like higher consumption of cannabis. Dispensaries are probably doing very well. And me, I sell, you know, as many or more seeds in this past year than I had in years before. So, I mean, it's been a steady progress. The cannabis business is good. It's very good to me. And like, what is the old comedian from Saturday Night Live used to do with soccer? But yeah, so business-wise, COVID-19 hasn't had a noticeably negative effect on Brothers Grimm. And but it is a weird year where the restriction of not being able to mix in public has stopped me from going to cannabis shows and places where we used to do direct over-the-counter retail sale of the seeds to the public. And not only the opportunity to sell seeds over the counter and deal direct with the public from a vendor standpoint, if you will, or you know, financially or as a business, but there's also the element of like, wow, you know, shaking the hands. I always say kissing babies and shaking hands, or vice versa, you know, shaking babies and kissing hands, that interaction of the pressing of the flesh, being out there with the public, letting people see that more personal side of yourself, that the expansion from the online presence that you're able to have, like with those limited little snippets of pictures or a little video on Instagram, or I mean, I have a pretty good big following on Facebook too. Rick Campanella, obviously, is my real name, and so there, I think that it's interesting what you can project about yourself and the kind of work you do through those social media platforms, and then comparing it to who you really are, getting to know the person behind the scenes. So there's a lot of that that's been missed out on this year. And I also had a kind of rather tragic event. I was brutally attacked on October 1st in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, by a jealous ex-partner who attacked me by surprise from behind with a pistol, and actually hit me so hard in the head with a pistol, I never saw it coming, and I was knocked unconscious onto the pavement in the parking lot outside of his grow operation, and found myself, moments later, because when you're knocked out, you really don't sense time passing. So I have no idea how long I was unconscious on the pavement before I tried to stagger to my feet, and found the guy standing there with a pistol pointing it at my forehead and telling me not to get up. And I had, there were pictures that been circulated on Instagram and so on that I was being beaten pretty savagely. And really the sad part of it is that there are people who will look at those pictures and think that I did something wrong just because I'm beaten and bloodied. And it's an interesting sociological experiment to be the subject of, or the victim, you should say, of online bullying. But now I'm experiencing what that's like to be the victim of online bullying and having been physically attacked by another person who's then trying to defame me in the community by saying that I did something bad and that's why he was hitting me, rather than seeing this as like, look at how savagely and horribly this man is being beaten. The person doing that must be effed up, not the victim. But it's like women, I think, have always complained that when they report a rape, they risk being, called the victim. The victim is being called the cause of the incident. They get blamed, even though they're an innocent victim of an attack. And I think that it's been made very clear to me how that works sociologically, psychologically with people. Just on the value, just on the strength of a picture showing you in a compromising position, it can make people get the wrong idea. And then the other catch-22 about online bullying is that when you try to defend yourself or explain that, no, that's not the truth, this man is lying, this person is lying about me, and that this isn't the way it looked, this isn't really what happened. What happens is you get this Barbara Streisand effect of, there's a story about Barbara Streisand wanting to squelch this video that she didn't want anybody to see, was because it gave away the location of her home. And by suing the people to take it down, she only caused more interest in it and made like 1 million people downloaded the damn video that would have never done it if she hadn't brought it up. So there's that effect of, as the victim and you're trying to defend yourself, you still don't want to cause more attention to the very thing that you want to say, hey, people shouldn't see this the way that they're seeing it, and this isn't the truth. And it's a mess. It's really very difficult to, and me personally, I feel like I've always projected myself, as an honest, straightforward person who's kind of wholesome in a lot of ways. I mean, I raise alpacas, I live on a farm, I'm a breeder, cannabis. This whole thing, you would think somebody looks at that picture and sees, gee, this is a pillar of our community being horribly attacked by this maniac. And instead, it's an opportunity where people latch onto the idea that the other guy was doing this because I'm a bad person. Now, how long has the people known me? What's my reputation? I think if I was that kind of person, it would have come out a long time ago. I mean, that doesn't happen to somebody suddenly at 60 years old. The guy's accusing me, by the way, of being an abuser of women, like I hit his daughter or whatever because I was dating his daughter. But if you asked his daughter, and I mean, I have her on tape. I recorded her the other day talking to me on the phone. She still loves me and wants to get back together. And I broke up with her a few months ago, and she admitted, I know my dad's lying, and I know that, you know, you never touched me. You were the nicest boyfriend I ever had. And I mean, the truth is there. It's just that I've been shocked by the knee-jerk reaction that people will have sometimes when you're in a compromising position in a photograph or something, and they just think the worst, and without any really any thought about, gee, I think I know this person better. That's not, in general, most people's knee-jerk reaction, and it's kind of sad to see that that's the way the mind works, you know, in the human being. But enough about you know, that incident, because I'm trying to put it behind me. It was almost 2 months ago. I'm lucky to be walking around. I mean, this man hit me so hard, I had a concussion. He broke my cheekbone, broke the eardrum on the side where I was hit. And there's pictures that are out there, very grotesque pictures on the internet of someone who had taken a few shots of the incident while it was happening, as well as pictures of me in the hospital and so on. So it's a little bit like being reborn. And, you know, when you come that close to being killed, you think like, A, what would have happened if I had been killed that day? What would have been my legacy? How would people have remembered me? And, you know, B, having gotten through that and feeling fortunate to still have a brain, still be able to walk and talk and chew gum, being alive. And so it's like a second chance at, it could have all ended then, and you kind of think of all the questions of what ifs, and then moving forward, you'd want to live your life in a way where it's like, hey, I'm not going to keep my head down and do stupid shit, waste time. I want to grow and live and appreciate this experience that's unfolding all around me now. It's been going on for 61 years in my case, and I hope it keeps going on until I'm 100, because when I was a little kid, I always tell everybody, I think I'll live to be about 100. And I hope that's true, because that would still give me about 40 more years. And I really love life. I love being on the planet Earth and experiencing everything that this world has to offer. So I'm going to just keep doing that. And I'm working on some great projects, breeding wise, putting out some new seeds, keeping the supplies of all the stuff that people love that comes from Brothers Grimm, like Cinderella 99, Apollo, Rosetta Stone is a huge new favorite. Grimm Glue is like the latest kid on the block. Everybody loves that. And so I'm keeping up the levels of seed inventory by breeding regularly. I've got a perpetual harvest system going where I'm harvesting every 3 weeks. And each one of those harvests can be, you know, a fairly good quantity of seeds, or, you know, there are friends and family that I'll make flour for too. And that's on a very limited basis. And they're all a little bit jonesing right now because I've been making seeds for the past few months. And they're all asking me, like, when can I get you know, when's the next time you're going to have a jar of really good flour? And I'm like, you know, right now I'm scrambling to make up for the seed inventories that were dipped into over the summer and spring and summer this year. Many of the commercial growers, you know, realized that it's more economical to go and purchase fem seeds from a reputable source like Brothers Grimm, where you know that you're going to get nothing but real female plants, because clones are more expensive than seeds, and you can start a seed and have a uniform crop of all of your plants being the same age, if you will, like started on the same day, and they've progressed and grown in lockstep with one another. So you're growing a little army of plants that all started at the same time and all grow uniformly, which is what Brothers Grimm's known for. And Mr. Saul breeds for, you know, consistency, uniformity. When you buy a pack of seeds and a year later you buy the same strain, you know, those two experiences of growing that pack of seeds is identical because the plants all look the same. Where that's kind of difficult to get. So where was I? So working on making enough of those seeds so that the commercial growers, that's where I was. It was an interesting year in the sense that it's the first year when commercial growers really came to me in sizable numbers and asked for sizable numbers of seeds, like 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 seeds. And then, of course, as the breeder, you feel like, hey, I'm a mathematician, scientist, and I understand the statistics and numbers and how all that works. And there's an element of I've grown and my clients have grown all of my strains and all my fem strains, and it's been proven to a fairly high certainty you're not going to get anything but female plants. There won't be Hermes or, but when someone says, I'm going to grow 150,000 of your seeds, that's like, wow, statistically, it's so huge that even though I may have, and my clients may have grown hundreds or thousand, at most 1,000 all in one go, here's a person going to do like 100 times that. And you're like, holy shit, geez, I hope nothing comes out of that larger population that was hidden by me only working with smaller populations. You follow me? I can tell from the expression on your face. So mathematics is a very interesting thing, statistics in particular. But I'm happy and proud to, at the end of the season, say, gee, these guys grew hundreds of thousands of plants and never had an issue. And at the end of the season, I actually came down, visited, and hung with the cultivation manager, and he's patting me on the back, and man, we're just so happy with your genetics, and this worked out so well for us. So that was a huge coup this year. I really feel like the genetics were put through a really meaningful experiment and tested against large populations. Still, the guy told me, like, out of those 100,000 plants, we never found a male flower on anything. And I mean, that means you really nailed it. That it wasn't a fluke that the other experiments went well. So very happy with that. The fem seed ability, I'd say the ability for Brothers Grimm to produce that kind of quality of feminized seed is really gratifying to see that. That's been tested so thoroughly, and we've made lots of new testimonials and clients that we can refer people to say, don't believe us, believe our clients. So
that's
kind
quite
of
a
nice.
Testimonial.
Yeah. So I feel like for Brothers Grimm, it's been an interesting year in the sense that we lost that ability to come to the cannabis conventions and meet with people and mingle. I mean, look at the kind of community that we have. We pass joints around, we pass pipes around. It's so unsanitary, if you will, given the COVID thing going on. And so all those events have been shut down. We've been restricted from meeting with each other. And yet at the same time, we're staying connected through the internet and Instagram, Facebook, what have you. And so that's been an interesting sociological experiment. The personal things that have happened to me with the community and people, and the interactions through social media, and how that's all evolved this year. It's really been, I think we're going to look back on this year. I don't think that's a big stretch for anybody to imagine that we will look back on 2020 as having been one of those years like, yeah, man, I remember that, I lived through that. We'll tell our kids, all that kind of stuff, right? Is a very strange time indeed. But I feel like here I live on a farm, and I'm far away in Colorado from interacting with people in my everyday life. I can stay socially distanced fairly easily. So I'm fortunate in that respect. And being in the cannabis business, I'm fortunate in that respect. So I've weathered 2020 pretty well, and I hate to be a person who makes others feel badly, and that's not my intention by any stretch of the imagination. Just trying to answer the question, how has 2020 treated us? And I have to say, well, thankfully, we're in the right kind of business where 2020 didn't hurt us that much. But I do have family members and friends and so on that throughout this entire time, you know, unbeknownst to anybody, because I'm not posting about it or talking about it really, but family and friends have been supported by Brothers Grimm by either working for me directly or me providing flour for them at an inexpensive price that they can turn it over and make a profit on. And so keeping family and friends employed and feeding their cottage industries has been really rewarding for me, in the sense that I feel like, okay, I'm going to try to give back. And I do a lot of, I respond, people will tell you, you know, gee, I wrote to Mr. Soul and asked him if he would please just help me during this time. I need some seeds. And I'll say, just tell me where to send them. You know what I mean? Don't worry about paying for them. If you need something to start a garden, I have enough seeds that are in the vault that maybe I'll never sell them. And maybe there's strains that, you know, they're good, but they weren't on the menu, but somebody wants free seeds. I've never regretted being generous. Whenever some situation arises where I can be generous to somebody and I feel they deserve it or I want to do it, I've never looked back on any one of those times in my entire life where I feel like I was generous to that person I shouldn't have been. I mean, that's just not an emotion that I feel like just doesn't. You never regret being nice. You never regret being generous. So do it. You know, it feels good. Spread that shit around and sprinkle that on everywhere. You know. So that's the way things have been for me so far this this year, and keeping busy. Lots of growing. Lots of when being in the seed business, you have processes that are similar to when people are growing for flour or extract. You know, that you branch off at some point after the grow is over and you're processing the finished product. In my case, it's mostly seeds, and so breaking down the buds that have been seeded, step one, you know, and then separating the wheat from the chaff, if you will, you know, getting the seeds separated from all that loose vegetative material, and then sorting and counting and packaging. So as you can tell, that can be a little tedious, and there's a whole flow to that happily I've found a really consistent assistant who he's with me every day and spends most of the day here, and we work together to get those things done. Some days are really easy for the guy. I mean, there's nothing to do because today's not a big day. And then other times it's like, oh boy, this is why I have to roll up my sleeves and buckle down, put in a 13, 15-hour day, for 2 or 3 days in a row, working on a new harvest that's coming in, and or some big order for seeds that needs to be sorted, counted, and that type of thing. So he's got his big days and his little days, and it all kind of averages out. So that arrangement has worked really well this year. I think I hired, this guy's name is Chris. Hey, Chris, little shout out. Chris Campbell, my number one assistant. He's probably going on about a year with me now. And like I say, it all averages out nice. He likes the arrangement. He's got a family, and this way, on an easy day, he can go home and help his wife and his kid. He's got another kid on the way. So I like this being plugged into a little network of people who are either my colleagues, my employees, my friends, my family. And I help people a lot of times who have drug addictions that are trying to get off of that and do it through the use of marijuana. And I always remind them that try to plug into a social network in reality, not just online, that being part of a group, being in a social network, that's what breaks people from that cycle of addiction. And I've read a lot about that because they're taking this drug and it's sort of a substitute for human interaction. And so when people want to break an addiction, one of the best ways is to become more socially interactive and part of a network of people where you feel like you're part of something, and people, depend on you, and vice versa. And that that's what, when you think about it, we were evolved for that. We're humans on the planet Earth, and we probably spent a lot longer time as cavemen than we did, as human modern people in the lifestyles that we live now. So I guess what I'm saying is it's in our core makeup and our evolution of a human being that interacting with the rest of the clan, the other people, is not something that's just sort of optional. It's really supposed to be a part of your life. This is how humans have evolved over all these millions of years, is the dependence and the interplay of one person to another and the group, and where you fit into a group. And these are all things that are hugely rewarding to you in the core of your being. And when you don't have that and you're substituting it with drugs, that's what addiction is all about, at least the way I understand it. So I've seen a lot of success stories. I've seen people getting off of the hard drugs and using marijuana to do that. And when I can help, I'm happy to do it.
Thank goodness, man. That pharmaceutical drugs, man, the drugs on the heavy end can be just terrible. And marijuana can help a lot of people get off a lot of them
It's
drugs.
good for what ails you.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people kick some hard drugs with RSO, and it's nice to see that.
As well as curing people from various ailments, cancer, whatever. Many people have had great success curing the whatever ails you, basically, with marijuana. I've always felt like, since I was a teenager, the first time I smoked pot, I was like 14 years old, and I have an uncle who's like 5 years older than me, and he was like the cool uncle, and I went to visit him and found some pot in his room, and was like, "Do you know what that is?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's marijuana, isn't it?" He's like, "That's Acapulco Gold." It was really that old school weed back in that day. I think it must have been 1975, because I was 14 years old, maybe 73. And 73, I would have been 14. So here we are getting high for the first time. And I loved the experience. I just knew right from that very first time, it was like, this stuff's for me. It's like, doesn't give you a hangover like booze does, doesn't make me dizzy like smoking cigarettes did. It was like, this is the one cool substance that I've found that really makes you feel good. And later I realized that, whatever ails you, it's like one of these things is good for what ails you, I guess is the expression. Marijuana seems to have this quality of each person is affected by it as needed. It's like this person had a need, they smoked the marijuana, and it kind of like, it helped me with either an anxiety, or it helped me with an emotional state, or it put something in, brought something to light, or made me have a realization or a way of looking at myself or my situation from a different perspective, and it helped me get through that. But it's always a very positive substance to use. The strength of marijuana, I always felt it's not as like clobbering you like alcohol does. Alcohol can really affect somebody to the point that you really can't pull yourself out of it, and you're just too drunk, right? Whereas marijuana, you can, I believe, never be so stoned that in an emergency you couldn't pull your shit together and have to be functional. So there's that less toxic end point or ability to overdose with marijuana. Obviously, it's basically impossible to overdose on marijuana. The worst thing that's going to happen is you just fall asleep, and you'll wake up later and you'll be okay. And I remember people being too high in coffee shops in Europe when I was in Amsterdam, and the bud tenders would recommend that the person eat something, have a sweet treat, have a cup of coffee, something like that, to pull you out of it. And Neil Young's famous for having recommended peppercorn. If you're too high and you want to feel, like come down a little, just put a peppercorn in your mouth and chew that up with your teeth. And something about black pepper being such a basic taste, basic in your childhood, probably your grandparents gave you eggs with salt and pepper on it, right? So there's something about that familiarity of the flavor of black pepper in your mouth that kind of cuts through any weirdness where you're feeling, gee, I'm spaced out and not feeling reality. Because I have gotten super high, and I'm probably sure everybody who smokes pot has had at least one or two experiences where, like, that time I was really high, and the experience isn't so debilitating as it is kind of comical or otherworldly. You feel it's more in your mind, you're worried that people might be talking about you. You get that paranoia, and like, am I acting weird? Am I looking weird? Am I sounding strange or anything? And that goes away, with a couple of hours of just chilling and eat a candy bar or something like the bud tender in Amsterdam would have told you, and and you come out of it. So I've always thought that pot's kind of like stronger than coffee, but not as strong as alcohol. It falls somewhere in that spectrum of not being as mild as a cup of coffee, but similar level of influence on your mood and your these are interesting things about the substance that we all share and love, cannabis. And when I get talking about it, I guess I just start to expand on what's it all mean to each of us, because I think it's one of those questions that's difficult to answer for any given stoner. Like, how would you describe in words what it's like to be high on marijuana? It's not really that easy to say it. Like, we all know instantly when you get high, like, oh yes, it's that old familiar marijuana feeling, but it's a little difficult to put in words. I find that
even after you said that there, how would you put it into words? I try to like start, putting it into words in my head.
See,
like,
and you drew a blank, right?
Yeah, I sure did.
But at the same time,
I didn't even know where to start.
So recognizable, though, instantly when you do get high. You take that first couple of hits of good weed and you, oh yeah, but if you had to describe, well, to someone who's never smoked pot, how would you in words say to them, oh, here's what it's going to be like? You'll take this puff, you'll take a deep breath, and when you blow it out, after a couple of times, maybe it won't be maybe on your first puff, but second or third, you'll start to feel this tingling sensation when you take a deep breath, like your lungs feel a little bit like they've come alive, and there's a tingling warm sensation in my body, in my lungs, and I feel a little silly, like the corners of my mouth are turning up, and I'm feeling like I'm getting a grin that I can't wipe off my face, and I can't keep focused on any one thing. It seems like new ideas just keep flashing through my brain uncontrollably, and I keep moving on to the next subject, and I get distracted by the way I'm thinking about something in a slightly different way than I would normally have thought it, and I'm kind of dwelling on, isn't that interesting? I've never looked at it that way before, or geez, when I did that earlier today, I wonder if other people saw it this way. These are the ways that I would verbally describe being high on marijuana, and that's about as close as I can come to it. And I also kind of describe that, within 2 hours, it'll kind of wear off too, And then there's
I've definitely heard the.
Go ahead.
The pepper thing about coming
down, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but what do you think of the idea that I have?
Is that in the pepper? Is that
like I said, my explanation is not quite as based on organic chemistry or some intellectual explanation of it through what chemical is doing what. I look at more like it's returning your feet to the ground, I guess, if you will, where I'm familiar with the taste of black pepper from such an early age that as high as you might be and spaced out as you might be, it's like a touchstone that brings you back to reality. You have this flavor in your mouth that's so familiar that's like, oh yeah, I'm okay. I'm tasting pepper. You know what I mean? That's my explanation of how that works and how it brings you down. And I think that's better to think of it that way than somebody explaining it to you from some chemical interaction that's going on between the terpenes and the pepper in your mouth, and what use is that to me, in understanding how this pepper is going to help me feel better when I'm too high. I'd rather have somebody explain it to me like, oh man, it's like, it just brings you back to reality. It's like your touchstone. It's this familiar place that will make you feel grounded again, and you won't feel like you're spaced out and somebody who you're not used to being. So
It was kind of funny
interesting.
because I
You
was
get me
just
talking about
explaining
about some interesting stuff, man. You chat with me for
I
a
was just
second. Let me load my pipe here.
Oh, sure. I was just explaining that with my oldest daughter, who's 25, and her boyfriend, who has anxiety, and I was just telling him about the peppercorn the other day, and they both looked at me like, "Come on, that can't be true." And I'm like, "Seriously, give it a try. I mean, what do you have to lose here?"
Well, except the high, you have that to lose, because you have to do it at a time when, hey, I'd really rather not be quite so high as I am right now. And so then you're taking that peppercorn and trying to bring yourself down. Now, I can't say that I find myself in that position often, like, geez, I'd like to be less stoned, so let me grab a peppercorn. It's more, that's for the folks who come over to your house who aren't used to smoking strong pot. I remember living in New York City, married to my third wife, and she and I lived in a small apartment there, and she had girlfriends who weren't real pot smokers, but since I'm in this business and I'd always be a pot smoker, they could say, let me try it, and they'd take one or two hits, and next thing I know, they're like, oh gee, and my wife would be coming to me like, I think we're gonna have to get a taxi for this gal because she's freaking out right now, and she took 2 hits of pot, and she's in the bathroom but can't come out. She's scared. Those would be the times where like, get the peppercorn out and see if it works on this girl. But I mean, it happened a handful of times that it's just memorable to me.
So in your smoking room currently, just like a candy dish, I mean, because you've got so much fire going on over there, I'm sure. Is there like a candy dish of peppercorns over there just for the folks? Just like a candy dish.
You're
gonna need some of those.
It's like the up button and the down button on the elevator.
So I have a question for you. Maybe you can help clarify a little bit for some of us. Lately we've been talking. There's been some conversation around the community about seeded cannabis and the effects of seeded cannabis. Yeah, in your opinion, like, do you think that? I'll let you.
I don't think that
basically we're saying that they're different, or maybe even a little bit stronger than the
I get what you're saying.
Unseeded.
But think about it. You're letting the plant grow, and it's becoming, it's going through its life cycle. Eventually, a bud, if you don't pollinate it, would be seedless bud, and there's less waste. I mean, when you break up a bud that's seeded, and you try to pull together after having rolled the seeds off, like we used to do. I mean, in the 70s when I was in high school, and we'd buy a bag of weed and it would be maybe 25% weight is seed in there. You have to separate that out and smoke what's left. Now, I wouldn't say that I'd be in the camp that believes that the seeded weed is somehow stronger than the one that isn't, because just by the handling of the bud and having to break it up and knock out the seeds and then scrape together all the broken up pieces of bud, you've lost a lot of resin that's fallen off of it and so on. So that manhandling of the bud would deteriorate its quality. And whereas a sinsemilla bud has no seeds in it, you basically just, that whole thing just gets crushed up in a grinder and everything goes right into your pipe or into a joint. So looking at it, from a physical standpoint, it doesn't seem to hold water that seeded bud would be stronger than non-seeded bud, just from the fact that, you're keeping more of that original trichome-laden material in your pipe or cigarette papers or whatever you're doing. But if you think of it from a physiological, botanical standpoint of, well, gee, would having the plant become pregnant, if you will, and become seeded have an effect on the potency? It doesn't seem likely, because the energies of the plant would then be diverted into the creation of seed, and the same amount of energy going to that plant that wasn't pollinated could be used for resin production, greater yield, all of those things. So from every way that you look at it, it just doesn't seem logical to assume that seeded weed would be stronger than Sinsemilla in terms of potency or resin production, or however you want to measure it. So it hasn't been my experience that seeded wheat is stronger than Sinsemilla, and I've done a lot of both. So for me, my personal, I would check the box as less potent when it's seeded and more potent when it isn't. This weed is, this is Airborne G13 that I had a pollen donor in the room that really didn't put out much pollen, and so these buds are only very lightly seeded, and so I'm keeping a little canister nearby when I smoke out of that jar. These are the seeds that if I do get a seed or two that comes out of a bud, I save it and throw it in that jar. So I'm smoking lightly seeded weed right now. I'll tell you if it's strong.
So I mean, okay, maybe not stronger, but do you think it could bring out some other effects that you wouldn't see that maybe, up further on the chart than
Well, that's a good point. You're asking if the cannabinoid profile might change because of the fact that it's seeded, right? So
yes.
maybe it more. I think the way that the synthesis goes is you have CBG, and that can go to either CBD or THC. And there's a synthase involved in that, let's say, maybe by pollinating the plant and having it grow seed affects how much of that precursor to CBD and THC goes in the direction that you want it to. In other words, makes more THC rather than CBD. That's a worthwhile experiment. It's not that I know the answer to what's the definitive answer of how is that affected by the plant being either seeded or not. I don't know the answer, but I think that you raise an interesting enough question that a botanist or a scientist would want to run that experiment and check on that exact thing to see, does the plant, when it's pollinated and making seed, convert more of its energies to THC versus CBD or vice versa? And you could do experiments where you figure that out. So that's you'd be very helpful to the research scientists by giving them the idea to track down.
That could be one of the factors from, what we remember back in the day to now, because we were smoking so much seeded cannabis back then. And now, we wonder where that gap lies. And then maybe it is within the seeded process somewhere.
I don't know. I mean, here's another difficulty in determining what's doing what is if I go back in my memory to the time when I first was introduced to seedless bud, because remember, I'm an old dude. I was around when when you smoked pot, it had seeds in it. You just didn't even think twice about it. It was only like this new novelty that came around. And like in my life, it might have been in 1979 or 1980. By that time, people started selling bud seedless, and it was available on a fairly regular basis. It wasn't like, once in a great while, somebody came around like, oh, here's some seedless weed. It started to be readily available in the 80s. Whereas in the 70s, it was almost like you never got anything that was seedless. And I'm trying to compare in my mind, like, was there any difference? I would have said, this new seedless bud was stronger, and then you're asking a more, a finer detail as to like, was it getting you higher in the way of like a sativa where you feel like this euphoric, spacey kind of high, or the sleepy indica high where you're getting couch lock? And I would have to say like that seeded weed just, it was a little stonier. It was like when you let your crop run an extra week and it goes beyond where you would have harvested it. And people say like, oh, the weed is a little stonier if you let it go beyond its peak harvest date. And that's true. That happens, you know. I can't say that it'll keep happening for some crazy length of time, but for a window of a week, one way or the other, a week late harvest is going to have a little more of a sleepy catch lock effect for that particular strain than you would have if you had harvested it a week earlier, you know. Cinderella 99 is a very euphoric sativa kind of high, and I've had people say, well, I run it an extra week longer and it takes a little bit of the edge off and brings it to like be a little stony or more less cerebral high and a little more body high. So there's something to be said for all of those things. But like most things in this business, you know, in this culture, we've been doing it underground for so long that science doesn't exist that can give us the definitive answers on things. It exists, but the research hasn't been done, is a better way to say it. That we're a community and an industry producing cannabis, breeding cannabis, and so on, that has had to do that clandestinely for 100 years. And we're only just in the last 7 or 10 years coming out and doing it on a legal basis. And so there's this transition of going from something that was like a black art to now scientifically well understood principles and, you know, repeatable processes that give you repeatable results. And there's going to be an adaptation over a few years or decade or two, probably, to get to the point where people really know the answers to some of these questions that we're throwing around like stoners in a smoky room. They'll actually have research to show, oh, this is why this works this way, and these are the chemicals that are in play with one another that cause that effect. And I think we'll understand cannabis a lot better in the next 10, 20 years than we do right now, just because of that coming out of being a black art and having all this stuff done in small, statistically insignificant populations, and conclusions being drawn by people who are kind of given to thought processes that are like holistic thinking. And you know how the stoner kind of the stereotype can be a little bit superstitious and these kinds of things. So during that time of development as a trade of breeding and growing cannabis, it's been done in that clandestine fashion that leaves a lot of questions still unanswered, or questions answered incorrectly that we're going to find out later. No, there was no real truth to that. That was something that you just kind of talked yourself into, or it was placebo effect or something like that. There's no scientific basis for it. So I think it's going to be a very interesting next couple of decades in understanding cannabis. I feel like just in my own development of as a breeder, learning how to make fem seeds reliably all female and avoiding any hermaphrodites, that was something that was huge for me, and I'm super proud of it. And I think it's just it's a microcosm or a small example of a bigger phenomenon that's going to happen in the cannabis world, where something that had been thought to be understood, or there was a procedure for it, but there were imperfections that needed to be worked out. Like in fem seeds, if you think about it, the early guys who were making fem seeds were making the mistake of stressing a female until it made flowers that then they would pollinate another female with that. And the fact that a female is a female because it has two X chromosomes, and the sex of the seed is determined by whether the pollen grain had either an X or a Y chromosome in it when it landed on the female flower, which is only going to have X chromosomes in it. And so by, where was I? The pollen in those days was coming from a stressed plant, remember? And the thought process of these guys was partially right, partially wrong. So stay with this thought that the X and Y chromosomes are what they're focusing on, and they're not thinking about the process by which they get the pollen from the female. So they're right in thinking that, yes, pollen coming from a female can't have a Y chromosome in it because a female doesn't have a Y chromosome to put in the pollen, right? So when you can force a female to make pollen, it's going to have all X chromosomes in the pollen, and then that'll meet with the X chromosomes in the Y in the in the female flower, and you'll get all seeds that make females. However, if that pollen came from a female that you stressed into creating male flowers, that's how you got your pollen, you've just proven that that female was a hermaphrodite by definition, because what is a hermaphrodite? It's a female plant that also grows male flowers under stressful conditions or just through its own nature of what's in its genetics. So they were doing the opposite thing that they should have been doing in the selection of the female that's going to be reversed to make the pollen. In other words, imagine now a room full of 100 plants that you have seen have female flowers, and you're thinking that these are all females, but I'm going to play with the light cycle and I'm going to find one or however many in that room that if I stress them by messing with their light cycle, they'll make male flowers, and I'll use that pollen to make female flowers. This is the way they were thinking. Now, what they should have done is taken all of the plants that in that room that were stressed into producing pollen and growing male flowers and get them the fuck out of the room and cull them, right? And then only focus on the females that didn't hermy when they were stressed, right? So if you follow with me now, here's what you've done. You've found the females that you want to use for breeding because they don't hermy. But the catch-22 is, well, if I can't get it to hermy, how am I going to get any pollen from it to make any seeds? Well, here's the second thing that they needed to understand that I understood through some genetics research that I looked up and played with. And what it turns out that it's a hormonal reaction, the creation of the male flower on the female. Okay, it's not because it has chromosomes. Chromosomes had nothing to do with it. It's the hormones. And if you think about it, when humans, you find a person who feels gender challenged, they feel like they're a male born in a female body, or vice versa. You know, I'm a woman born in a man's body. Those folks will take hormones, right? And a woman will develop a larger voice box, facial hair, all those things through taking hormones like testosterone to bring her more into the male gender physical representation. And so it's easy to imagine then, you know, like you've seen it with human beings, same thing with plants. So the plant is actually, because of a hormonal change in its physical makeup, that's what's producing this gender shift of making it go from a female plant to growing male flowers in conjunction with or in combination with the female flowers. So that's a hermaphrodite. When stress is applied to the organism, right, it has a hormonal reaction to the stress that then creates male flowers on what would have been a female plant. So just understand that. And then you can solve the problem of how am I going to get these plants that won't hermy to make pollen for me? Well, they're not responding to the stress by having this hormonal reaction and making male flowers, but that doesn't mean that you can't hormonally induce them to make the male flowers. It's just that stress doesn't do that. And that's a good thing, because if stress did it, that would mean that this plant is a hermaphrodite, and you don't want to pass on genes for hermaphroditism to the next generation. So when you find those plants that won't hermy, then you go to spraying with silver thiosulfate, colloidal silver. The important thing being the silver, because that's the thing that's blocking the female hormone from being expressed in the plant. And so the plant is more or less left with like, I got no choice but to make male flowers if I don't have the hormone to make female flowers, and I'm in a flowering light cycle. So by spraying this non-hermaphrodite female with a chemical that induces it hormonally to make male flowers. Now you've created male flowers that make pollen, that have the X chromosome that ensures that the plant's going to only create female seeds, and also not carrying the gene for hermaphroditism at the same time. So that was the most important thing that was going wrong with fem seeds when they were being made in the early years. And now I know how to do it right. I teach people how to do it right. I give seminars on, how fem seeds are created properly. And by doing that, I'm hoping that by educating the world and the breeding community, that you guys won't do it the old way and make that same mistake of using Hermes to make what they think are going to be fem seeds, when in fact they're going to be a lot of Hermes. So that's the bit of research that I know I personally got involved in, and I found that there was a very deep rabbit hole there and a solution to something that was misunderstood or not understood before. And it's because of the fact that this hasn't been legal. It hasn't been available for scientists to think about and do real research experiments and figure the problems out. Like, I just took one of the most obvious ones that needed to be solved and dug deep and figured it out. But imagine the people who will come after me and answer questions like the ones that you thought of earlier that I wouldn't ever even probably concern myself with, because everybody's different. We're all individuals. You might have an idea that I didn't have, and that creates some path in the research scientist protocol. And here's an interesting question I want to answer for myself. And what kind of conditions or what experiment might I construct to tell me the answer to Eagle's question here? Because I'm really intrigued by. I got to figure this out. He's got a really interesting question I need to answer.
I'm kind of intrigued back by what you just brought up here, and I'm going to try to tread lightly here.
Go ahead.
Not that there's anything wrong with that lifestyle, but I'm kind of bringing it back to the human aspect of it here. I can't help but wonder if over the years our ingestion of heavy metals, aluminums and stuff like that, through deodorants and stuff like that hasn't brought out the expression in humans of
I see what you're saying, because of the metal acting as a block to a hormone. And I always think of it like receptors, and when you have receptors in your body for whatever chemical that you might ingest, and then they kind of like fit into each other like a key and a lock. I think it's something like that going on, where the silver blocks what would have been a receptor or a way of transmitting the hormone, making it available to the plant to make female flowers. That's been restricted, and so the plant then throws male flowers. So you're saying by using deodorant like that, the aluminum particles that are in deodorant, underarm deodorant, might actually be could have a hormonal effect on us and be feminizing men and things like that. It's an interesting.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that it could be that bad, but who knows?
Aluminum in the human body is terrible, but that's just one example of things we take in without even thinking about.
You're right, though. I mean, it does seem like a pretty foreign thing to do, is take aluminum particles and use them to clog your pores. Right? Isn't that how that works? Right. Gee, I haven't sweat in a week. I haven't even put on any fresh deodorant. There used to be commercials like for Mitchum or whatever it was, this really strong deodorant where it's like, I didn't use a deodorant today and I might not use it tomorrow because I put it on yesterday. It lasts like 3 days.
That stuff's terrible. That's another thing too. I mean, it's something that we're supposed to do. How can you block it for so long and then expect it to be good for you? I mean, there's a reason why we're perspirating. You just shut that off. It can't be good.
Oh man, that's
So I got another question for you here. A friend of mine, Jack Greenstock, He would like to know, how do you feel about, let me get my cursor up. How do you feel about back cross breeding for stability compares with line breeding to F6 or later?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. And I don't know if your boy, he knows me and my style as a breeder, but I've always been a back crossing guy. Cinderella 99 is the result of back crossing 4 times to the same female with each next generation of the progeny, so that more of that same female's genes are coming into the next generation. So I created Cinderella 9 and its stability by the back crossing process rather than doing some kind of line breeding, which the reason I choose to do it that way is a more sure way of doubling up the genetics from one particular female that I want to emphasize in the progeny, as opposed to going through F1, 2, 3, 4, F6, whatever Mr. Greenstock mentioned earlier there. But imagine the opportunity for making mistakes when you're taking generation after generation and choosing which plant to cross with which from that generation to create the next generation, and the mistakes and the opportunity for error in doing it that way is so much greater than just saying, well, I've kept it very simple. It's this one organism that I'm going to keep back crossing to each next generation. You really can't mess that up as easily as choosing a new male and female to create the next generation, each like filial generation. If you're F1s, to make an F2, you have to cross 2 F1s. So you have to, from the seeds that you grew from your original cross, grow them out, pick a male and female that you really like, that demonstrate the kinds of qualities that you want in the next generation. And then to reinforce that, you're crossing those two. And the big problem there too is with males, you can't really tell by a male what kind of female flowers his daughters are going to have, because he doesn't have any female flowers to judge him by, right? So 50% of the genes that are going into the next generation are coming from I'd be generous to call it an educated guess as to what the qualities of the male are going to create in his female offspring, right? I can talk for a long time on the subject, and I've written articles even recently in Oklahoma, Cannabis Oklahoma magazine. I have an article in this month's issue where choosing the male is such a guessing game that breeders have been playing for decades, and people don't really think about it. And you'll see things like somebody will post a picture on Instagram and say, this is, it's a male plant, and it'll be like, this is the stud I'm going to use to create the next generation. And they're talking up a male as if they know something about how good he's going to be, when the real measure of the quality of a male in breeding is his female offspring. Because remember, that's what we're really shooting for, is female plants. So when you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to cross a male and a female to make the next generation seeds, remember, the point is you have very limited information by which you can judge the female qualities of the male. Why? Because it's a male. It doesn't have female qualities. It doesn't have female flowers to judge what its children might inherit, right? But the female, you can do that. You can obviously see the female and say, okay, this thing is an ass-kicking bud producer, and I want, it will likely pass that on to its children, because like begets like in breeding, right? But with the male, you're looking at this thing that is hiding whatever potential it might have to create female flowers in its female progeny. So the only way to really know the quality of the male is to test cross it to several females and see if there's some common denominator that you can say, oh, that male did this, and this is the effect of it on the female flowers of its female children. And there's a lot of research and time and space that would need to be devoted to doing that. And now that's just to test one male. Now remember, you're just picking one male. Who knows if the brother of that one wouldn't have been twice as good and you didn't test it? You know what I mean? So you'd have to test all these males by making test crosses with females to determine what kind of female progeny that male was likely to produce. And then finally, now you know the value of that male in the breeding. So imagine, it's so hard choosing males to consistently continue developing the female progeny to have a quality that you're shooting for, reinforcing and trying to stabilize, that imagine how many opportunities for mistakes there are there versus back crossing to the same organism over and over. So back crossing is a much more guaranteed stabilizing effect, and it avoids the choosing of the male, or it's less important. And by the way, when we're talking about fem seed and how they're made, and you're using two females to cross together to get the seed, the other huge benefit to that we glossed right over and didn't even bring up when we were talking about it earlier is that, wow, it solves the male problem that we were just talking about. Like, when you're trying to create progeny from two parents, it'd be nice to see that you can look for that same quality in both parents that you're trying to bring into the next generation. But with a male, you can't tell because it's not a female, and you're only interested in the female qualities of his offspring. So by crossing two females, you have a hugely more predictable result, because you're seeing the female qualities of both parents, and you can guess what the female qualities of the progeny are going to be with a hugely more accurate degree of accuracy. So I'll take a step down from my soapbox there, because that was a big mouthful and a mindful for somebody who doesn't already know what I'm talking about to sort of absorb all of that. Rewind this and listen to that a couple of times if anybody's listening to this and is really interested, because it was said pretty concisely, and if you listen to it a few times, you're going to get it. And it's really important that you do, because breeding cannabis has been, black art, and we need to bring the science into it and an understanding of what we're doing if we're going to progress and solve the issues of developing drugs and having cannabinoid profiles that accomplish the things we want to accomplish and so on.
I thank you for throwing that out there. It may have been a little soapboxy for you, but there's so many inspiring breeders out there, and people that wanting to breed just for themselves or whatever. If they're gonna do it, they should be knowing what they're doing and the steps how to do it right. So thank you for throwing it out there, taking the time to throw it out there.
Yeah, well, it's been my pleasure. I'll probably take the opportunity to sign off. I've been on for about 45 minutes. Is that cool? You want me to stick around?
I'm happy for whatever I get.
I'll stick around as long as you can keep throwing questions at me, and I don't feel like I'm repeating myself or anything. But I'm a farmer. I live on a ranch, and I get up early and do my chores at like 5 and 6 a.m. And so for me, I'm starting to stay up. But I'll stick around.
That's up to you.
If you have a question,
they'll throw questions. If you ask for questions, I've got a couple.
Who was it?
Here.
Jack,
one of them.
Who was it? Jack the Beanstalk. Who was the last guy who asked?
Jack Greenstock.
Jack Greenstock. Thanks for asking that question. By the way, that was a good one. We got a really nice little nice response there. I got to explain some stuff I always like to talk about.
Well, the next question following Jack was from Florida Nugs there, and he would like to know if you ever have thought or considered bringing back the Green Avenger strain just for to have it out there.
It's definitely something that I can do again if I want to. And with just passing this last year, it might be a great suggestion. Again, I mean, your audience, your listeners are awesome. Look at the questions that they're throwing out. That's a great suggestion. Maybe I will seriously consider it.
I know I'd like to see it. That'd be a nice way to help memorize our friend and yourself, and a great strain. that was memorable to begin with. So that would be pretty
Did
awesome.
you happen to notice? I mean, I don't think everybody pays attention to everything I do, but on my feed, in the Mr. Soul _ C99 feed on Instagram, I posted Subcool's Quirkle being grown outdoors, and I had it as a mother plant and doing some indoor growing for probably a year and a half, and it was starting to be one of these mothers that's like, well, it's either getting too big to keep in the indoors and we're going to cut it down and just grow from clones from there, or we can just take it outside and flower it out in the natural. And it was like late May, so I brought it outside. This thing turned into a big monster, huge colas, and turned purple in a little bit, just came out awesome. And the whole season, it was like my tribute to Subcool by growing his Quirkle outdoors and caring for it and hand watering it and watching it grow. And it turned it into this monstrous plant. But your commenter there just made a really good suggestion. Why don't we take the Green Avenger? And I think what the Green Avenger was a vortex cross to the Genius. And it was pretty cool. I remember it being really potent. And it was one of these things that's almost like, well, it didn't look as resinous as some other plants, but it had so much potency regardless that it was like a sleeper, it was like a surprise. Took me by surprise. Didn't look like it was going to be that potent, but it kicked my ass. And they were pretty good yielders too. Pleasure to grow.
That'd be pretty awesome. I'd like to see it. I would definitely snatch up a few packs myself. That's for sure.
Well, right now I'm doing this weird thing where, Mac 1 from Capulator is all the rage in the last couple of years. And I am a big fan of that particular clone, Mac 1. And I haven't really grown any of the seeds that he sells, but that one clone that he had, that's been passed around, and there's the whole rule of the Mac. You only get that by somebody honoring you with giving it to you as a gift, and so on and so forth. Well, I don't know if you know the whole lore behind the Mac 1, because I can see in your face maybe you're not familiar with it, but let me just tell your audience and yourself. Capulator discovered this clone that he created by doing some breeding that was intelligent breeding, and I respect the guy, he's good, but this plant it just, out of all my 2 or 3 decades of doing this, I never sat up and took notice of any one particular plant before like I did to this one. And when you smell the flower and the terp profile and everything, it's really rather intoxicating and unique and intriguing to me anyway. So I took a great liking to that clone, and it was just by seeing pictures of it and like I say, that I had some initial reaction, a strong reaction to it, where it made me sit up and take notice and say, now that's something I'd like to know more about and possibly breed with or something. And it was because of the incredible resin production and what else? The terp profile, essentially, those 2 things. And I had learned that, well, this guy who created it, his name is Capulator, he's out in California, and he has given the clone away, and in a sort of like mystic or spiritual sense, like, okay, I'm giving this clone to the world, but I have these couple of little rules that I want to go along with it. If you're to take this clone, you're only to give it to another person if you respect them as a grower and you want to honor them with this clone. And conversely, if somebody is like asking for it or wanting to buy it, you're not allowed to give it to that person. So is that clear now? Have I made that clear? It's like, here are the rules for Cap's Cut. You can only get it by somebody coming to you and honoring you with it because they respect you. And it is not supposed to be given to people who are just asking for it or asking to buy it off of you. Okay. So in other words, say somebody says to you, hey man, I heard you got that Mac 1 cut. You think you could possibly give me a cutting from it? I'm sorry, dude, you just invalidated my ability to give you a cut. You hear? So it's like, you got to keep your mouth shut and hope somebody will give it to you. And that is kind of a cool concept. But at the same time, people will ask me, like, if I buy your seeds, can I breed with them? What can I do with them? And like, well, man, dude, how could I ever create any kind of rules that you have to live within when you buy my seeds? They're your seeds after you bought them from me. You want to breed with them. You want to do any start a seed company with them. How would I ever have any control over that I could ever exert and pretend to be able to control that? So I can't make a rule like that for my customers, right? But what this guy is doing is kind of thinking in a mystical, spiritual way, like, okay, because I've set it out this way, people will honor that, but people are people and you can't control that. And so to whatever degree people followed that rule, I got the cutting the right way. I had Jonathan Covert from Covert Genetics came to me and, hey, dude, I've always admired you. I respect you as a breeder, and I have the Mac 1 cut. Would you like it? I'd like to honor you with it. And so he brought it to me, and we had a little lunch and ceremony and talked, and I got the clone from him. And I tried to always honor that too. When somebody would ask for it, I'd say, dude, I'm so sorry you can't have it now because you asked for it. But and I would only give it to people that I cared about and honored, and so on and so forth. One organization, though, out in Oklahoma needed to give me some money for it because they were going to make like fucking millions off of it, right? And they're growing it in a commercial situation. And they came to me and said, look, here, we can't just take this thing for free. What can we give you for it? That's the only time I've ever taken money for it, but you're not supposed to sell it. I just felt that that's a commercial concern, and they're just doing the right thing with me in that case. But going back to the Mac 1, it's so intriguing as a plant because it's almost like it has a certain perfection about it where anytime you try to breed it and create something better than it, it's always less good than the clone that it started from. And when you're breeding, there's no point in creating a seed line from a plant that isn't as good as the plant itself. Like if the next generation doesn't improve upon the last generation, you might as well be growing the previous generation, you see? And especially when it's a clone, and in the cannabis business, we can keep clones growing and have a mother plant for as long as we want it, right? So if you have the option of filling a room full of clones from a mother that are exceptional quality versus using it to breed a seed line that creates something less good than that, why would you ever have any use for those less good seeds? You just grow the clones of the original, right? So as a breeder, that's one of my criteria, is that if I create a seed line, it has to be something that is greater than the sum of its two parents. And then now it's created something new, different, better, or at least, can stand on its own as another option to the parent plant. So this Mac 1 clone is so perfect in so many ways that it's very difficult to breed with it and get something better than what you started with. Because if you think about the whole concept of perfection, right? If something's perfect, like this is an interesting thing for the religious out there, right? Like if heaven is supposed to be this place where everything is perfect, it must be at a complete standstill, right? Because any change from perfection is not perfect anymore. So once you hit perfection, everything has to pretty much lock and never change. So that's kind of an unrealistic thing. But I look at that as kind of a mind experiment, a thought experiment as to why is it that we have so much trouble breeding with the Mac 1 clone and we just can't seem to get anything that's any better than what we started with, because it's kind of perfect in a lot of ways. But I did breed it with Cinderella 99, and Cinderella 99 always seems to breed so well with everything that you try it with, that with the Mac clone, the only issue is that the number of seeds produced on this plant is so few that you can't really make a commercial run of Mac hybrid seed from the Mac 1, because it has this quality of, you can have Mac 1 flowering in a room where you're pollinating the whole room and the other plants are growing seeds, and on the Mac, it has like 3 seeds or a half a dozen seeds. It just doesn't take the pollen, doesn't make seeds. It resists being pollinated. So that's kind of a cool quality, to have a plant where, geez, even if there's pollen in the room, it really won't get seeded, and you'll still get seedless weed when you're done. And as a breeder, I mean, I can have it in a room and I'll be pollinating other plants, and I'll be growing the Mac 1 clones in that room, and they're producing just pure seedless flower in the same room where I'm making seeds on other plants. It's like, who would have thought you could even do that, right? But that's one of the qualities of this clone. And at the same time, as a breeder, that's frustrating, because if you wanted to use it to make seeds, you could never make enough where devoting a room full of plants and trying to grow them for seed, and you're only getting a few seeds on each plant, you're never going to make any money like that. It's not going to work. So I've done things where I've taken the Mac 1 clone and I've sprayed it and reversed it because it's not a Hermy. It's got very strong anti-Hermy qualities. So it's a safe plant to reverse and use to make pollen. And I thought, I'm being brilliant now, right? Look at me, I figured this out. And the female doesn't make a lot of seeds, right? But I can take that female, reverse it, make that female make pollen that then on another plant that does make seed readily, I've now solved the problem of not being able to produce a large number of seeds. Well, what I just found out, at least in my initial tries, the pollen that's created by this thing is like 95% not viable. And so like you only get an occasional seed even from the fucking pollen. Isn't that crazy? So this plant is it's almost very frustrating.
The other way.
Yeah. I thought I was being brilliant. Like, oh, here's the solution. I'll make pollen, because pollen, you're making billions of little grains and they'll land on those other flowers, and then I'll have a bunch of seeds, right? And lo and behold, it was like not much of the pollen actually ever really worked. I got a couple of seeds, at least what I can see right now, what I'm about to take down, it really didn't work out that well. I had a whole full room full of Rosetta Stone, and I mean, these are monster colas of Rosetta Stone, and they're sitting right next to a plant it's a Mac 1 that's been reversed and pollen's coming out of it, but it's having no effect on the freaking flowers. So I'm playing with some weird shit lately as a breeder. I'm finding it interesting, because I don't really have the pressure to create new strains all the time. I'm not that kind of guy. I have my menu of tried and true strains that people love, like Apollo, Cinderella, Rosetta Stone, and more recently the Grim Glue and Queen of Soul, Killer Queen. These are all seed lines that I need to keep my inventory up, and I need to actually produce enough of those that they're there to fill packs of seeds when people order them and so on, because that's a known strain that is already saleable, if you will. And experimenting and creating new strains, while that's interesting, I don't want it to be something where it drives my business, because then the quality goes down. I'm not doing it then just because it's a super interesting project. Like, as I've been describing, I hope it's been clear how passionate and intrigued I am by working with Mac 1. I'm enjoying myself. I mean, this is what you're supposed to do with your life and your career, right? Is have a good time with it. So I'm doing that, but the pressure isn't on me to have something new to put on the menu at Brothers Grimm, even though that might be the result if it works. I'm not counting on it, and I'm chasing down some blind alleys, sometimes, but it's all part of the fun of it. So that's what's been happening with me.
I appreciate how thorough you are with your breeding and how passionate you are about it. I think that says a lot about your brand and why you're still, out there and, current today. Everybody knows when you want something that's, tried and true and going to be stable as hell. Brothers Grimm is one of the places you're going to find that.
Thank you. Yeah.
And, other thing I like to, I appreciate you that you do too is, if I remember correctly, you produce your films and your regular seeds in 2 different locales, so there's no even chance of cross pollination, right? So that's
if I have a facility where
there,
I'm
people
right
wouldn't
doing
take
fem
it.
seed,
I'm sorry.
you can't have a male in the whole facility just because there's that possibility that some pollen with a Y chromosome happens to get floating around in there, and you end up with an actual male from a pack of what should have been fem seeds. Your reputation is going to take a hit for that. I can't have that.
So
I try to maintain my reputation for stable, strong breeding and great genetics. And I think that one of the things that's come up in the years is that you kind of get very focused and concise about describing, things. And I came to the realization, and it seems obvious, not too long ago, that genetics matter most, in the sense that everything else is all environment, right? I mean, fertilizer, soil, light, LED versus HPS versus MH, all this stuff. It's just window dressing, if you will. It's all just creating the environment around the genetics that you started with. Because if I can make an analogy, a ridiculous comparison, the weed's going to suck if you planted celery seeds, right? All the fertilizer and light in the most high-tech growing room in the world isn't going to take celery seeds and turn them into great pot, right? So genetics are the thing that matters the most. You have to pick the seed or clone that's going to turn into the desired result eventually, because all the environment building in the world isn't going to do that if you didn't start with the right genetics. And so maybe it came out more long-winded than I had originally expected or hoped, but the point being, the genetics matter the most. And if you're going to grow and be successful with growing, pick the genes and then create the environment. Don't do it in reverse, like, try to use an environment because the environment is not going to take substandard genetics and somehow make it excellent. But you can start with excellent genetics and give it an average environment, and you're going to get a very superior result, right?
what are your thoughts on like indoor breeding versus outdoor breeding? Do you think that both should be sustained? Do you think if we go indoor for too long, we might take the plant in a direction that was so unnatural that traits that never would have been expressed outdoors because there's the environment so differently?
I mean, it's still it's the environment makes the difference between genotype and phenotype. So when we breed, we're not really we're working with the genotype, what's going on in the recipe, the internal organism's recipe for replication of cells and creation of the next generation and progeny and so on. Those are all things that are on such a tiny scale inside the organism that they're responsible for the expression of the traits of the organism under whatever environmental conditions the organism is living, right? And so breeding indoors versus breeding outdoors, there's really no difference in what's going on there, because it's the recombination of genes from two parents, and whether they were grown indoors or outdoors, it doesn't change the genes. It only changes the expression of how they look because they were grown indoors versus outdoors. Like that Querkle I was talking about earlier was grown indoors over several cycles, and we've observed a certain phenotype that was a solid, nice bud, very frosty, turned purple. It had a certain lavender kind of aroma, very pleasant, but it was more flower to leaf ratio than when we grew it outdoors. There was a much higher ratio of leaf to flower. The colas were big, stiff, thicker. I mean, it took on an entirely different look outdoors than it did indoors, but this is a clone, two clones, not even a seed, difference. two sisters, one indoors and one outdoors or something. This is clones of the exact same organism. So the effects of the environment are huge on the organism, and you're going to see them looking different whether they're grown indoors or outdoors. But when you're doing breeding, it's not going to matter whether the plant was grown indoors or outdoors. It's a combination of genes that were inherited by the plant and don't change because of the environment. You see, is that clear? Sometimes I wonder whether I've made myself clear, but I guess let me say it very quickly and concisely that the environment isn't going to change the recipe that's embedded in the plant. And so when it breeds with another organism, that little recipe exchange stays the same whether the plant was grown indoors or outdoors, because this is something that's intrinsic to the organism's makeup. And it doesn't matter whether it was exchanged indoors or outdoors, but you will see phenotypical differences in the plants while being grown indoors versus outdoors. But that doesn't change that internal mechanism that's creating the next generation of seeds.
It makes complete sense, but I'm still a little like on one end a little bit confused here because expression is a little bit of selection when you're breeding. So if you're outdoors and things are expressing a little bit out differently outdoors when you're doing your selections, from sun or just conditions, and you're selecting and then now taking.
Well, now you're bringing into it another element of, well, how does the phenotypical expression of the plant grown when outdoors affect the selection process in the mind of the chooser who's doing the breeding? And would he have seen those same qualities or been affected by the look of that plant for the same reasons if it had been grown indoors? And maybe that selection process might change. But I don't know. Now you're throwing a human element into it, where before we were just talking about, is there any difference if you were to cross, two parents that were grown indoors versus if they were grown outdoors? That's the question I was answering. That the genes stay the same. It doesn't matter if the plant was grown indoors or outdoors. If you're crossing those two individuals, the results are going to be the same in the progeny. But what you've asked is, like, given a selection process, a human being looking at these plants while they're growing outside, would he choose the same parents to create the next line of seed versus if they were grown indoors? Would he have seen that same thing and chosen those same two parents? Maybe not, probably not, but maybe depends on what they're looking for. What are you looking for as the breeder? What do you want to pass on to the next generation? Do I see it in the parents? And if they're grown indoors, I don't see it. If they're grown outdoors, I do see it. Then your point's well taken that the breeder could be misled, or maybe not misled, but influenced by something they're seeing that was due to the plant being grown outdoors. That quality made itself known better to the breeder than it would have done if it had been grown indoors. So there's those subtleties. I'll agree with you there that it could have, and it could influence the seed line and how it's progressing over time if the breeder's influenced by the differences that are expressed by the plant growing up as an indoor versus an outdoor plant. Outdoors, they grow much more like tree-like. The branches are like a bush, that they're not green and flexible, and like indoors, there's not a lot of heavy wind blowing everything around, so that the branches tend to be more supple and bendable. And on the positive side, the flowers tend to grow a lot more flower to leaf ratio. And outdoors, it seems as though the plant is almost defending itself against this harsher environment by throwing out more leaves, and almost like to protect the flowers, or to create more biomass that it can lose to the rough conditions of the outdoor environment, i.e. the wind and the rain and the insects and the loss of biomass, loss of leaves is compensated by an overproduction of leaves when the plant's outdoors. And indoors, you know, it's a little less leafy and there's more flowers, and that's what we want, really. That's why indoor bud tends to be better than the outdoor bud, because it tends to be a higher flower to leaf ratio, in my opinion anyway. That's what I'm seeing.
Totally off the wall one here for you. You know, we've never really discussed, you know, grow styles, and that one can kind of get deep. But they're wanting to know if you compost or reuse some of that alpaca poop. Yeah, is
I did.
that something you work into the garden?
I've been in this one location now. I'm going on my 4th year. So during that first year and a half or so, I had the alpacas and still have the alpacas. And of course, I was curious as to how good that would work as a fertilizer, and it worked great. It's a really good veg formula. All you need to do is take it fresh from the alpaca's ass. Basically, it drops right out. It doesn't need to be composted. It's immediately available to plants, the nutrients in the alpaca poop. And I would take like a 30-gallon reservoir and fill it with water and put a bubbler in it. And then I'd take like a sock, not a sock, you know what I mean, but a filter bag, a tea bag that you can buy at a grocery store. And I'd scoop up maybe 10 pounds of alpaca poop, which, you know, you could fit that in a milk jug. That's about how big of a quantity of alpaca poop I'm talking about. Imagine a 1-gallon jug of milk. Everybody can picture that. So about that size of alpaca poop in a filter bag, and you hang it in the reservoir and let it just sit there and bubble for 24 hours. And the next day you've got this sort of brown liquid, because all of the nutrients have leached out of the alpaca poop into that water. And, you know, you maybe would pH adjust it, make sure that you're in a reasonable range, because I think it's a little alkaline. And then you feed that to your plants. They're turning nice dark green, and, you know, with organics, you can't overfeed, you can't over fertilize. It won't burn the plants. So you can put as much on as you want, but, you know, it'll be pretty dark green and still not burn. It's only when you go to flowering, then the alpaca poop isn't really that useful there. But it makes a great veg formula. If anybody has an alpaca, or somebody in their neighborhood has one, and just go over and ask them, geez, I'll scoop up the poop from your alpaca for you every 3 or 4 days or once a week or something. And if I can keep some, I'm sure they'd be happy to have you come and do that. And it is basically free, high quality fertilizer. The reason I don't still do that, by the way, is because I'm doing experiments that require me to really know what's going on in the nutrients that I'm giving the plants and so on. And that was sort of just like, yeah, I know it's like the old expression with ragu spaghetti sauce. It's in there, you know, like I know the good stuff. I just don't know exactly what it has, because this isn't some product that I bought that has listed assessment of the components of what's in the fertilizer and so on. I just know it's alpaca poop, right? You know, so it wasn't precise enough in my understanding of what I was giving my plants to keep doing that. And people have, as you might imagine, you know, they'll come to Brothers Grammar or Mr. Soul and basically say, hey, we've got a product that if you would, you know, test it for us, and we'll give you free nutrients for, you know, 6 months or a year, whatever it takes for you to run them and give us your feedback. And I've been doing that with some things like Roots Organics. They have a line, liquid organic fertilizer called Soul, S-O-U-L, just the same like Mr. Soul. So I like it very much, and I've been using that for about 9 months or a year. And there's a guy in Australia that just recently gave me some newts that were specifically for flowering. So I dedicated one flowering room to it. Results are looking fantastic. And so because of those kinds of experiments where I have to know what I'm doing, I can't mix alpaca. So I've got a guy who on Facebook is a friend of mine, lives maybe 4 hours from here, I think, some other part of Colorado. He comes every spring to take my whole pile of alpaca poop that's been building up from my animals for the year and it's like an annual rite of passage. Joe Dirt, he calls himself, right? And so Joe Dirt comes over and picks up all my alpaca poop, and he has greenhouses where he grows cannabis, and the results he's getting. I mean, his daughter was standing in a picture on Facebook the other day where there's this plant that's twice her size standing, growing next to her where she's standing. And I'm talking about an adult daughter. I don't mean like, a 4-year-old or something. This is a huge, normal adult woman and this 14-foot monster standing next to her. So he's getting great results with the alpaca poop. And if anybody has access to that, yeah, go ahead, have at it. You can't hurt the plants. They'll love it.
I got more if you want them. If not, we can break
for like,
off
let
and do
me
this
give
again.
you like 5. Let me give you 5 more minutes or something. It's getting late for me to stay up, but I am enjoying the conversation. You're pulling some interesting stuff out of me, and I kind of like the idea of, gee, we're hitting good topics and making good conversation because we're talking shit with Eagle.
I like talking with you, man. You're a lot of fun to talk with, and very interesting, very knowledgeable, man.
Well, coming from somebody who talks to people for a living, I mean, I can't help but take that as a compliment.
Well, you're a very knowledgeable guy, man, and you just spew it pretty much. So,
yeah,
I mean, it doesn't take much coercing to get it out, and that's the great thing about you. You're very forthright with just wanting to get it out there.
I'm a communicator. Yeah, man. I have a message I want to tell. I always thought I should be in show business when I was a kid. I was like, why didn't I go after becoming a musician or an actor or something? Because I really like that limelight. I like to get up on stage and play the solo and tell people what I'm really thinking, or comedian or something. Do some stand-up comedy one of these days when I retire from breeding.
Well, since I've kind of exhausted you on some of the long-winded stuff, and you don't want to go too late, I'll throw you a couple softballs here, at least one.
Go ahead.
Dave's not here. Who's my Sunday's guest, by the way?
I love
says he would like to know the differences between genius, princess, and calf girl. If you could,
Cafe Girl and Princess and Genius. If you think about a batch of seeds, right? The same 2 parents. This female that has seeds in it. If you think about it, you break those seeds up out of the bud and just take that group of seeds and you grew them. And if 3 of those seeds turned out to be females, and I decided to name one princess and one genius and one cafe girl, they are sisters, right? There are 3 female cannabis plants that have the same parents, so they're sisters to each other. And there's the answer to your question. When I brought the seeds back from Amsterdam, one of those females was princess, her sister was genius, and the other sister was cafe girl. I never kept cafe girl beyond the 90s. Once I moved out of the States and went to Europe, the preservation of those clones was pretty much kept to just genius and princess, and a lot of seeds that I could use for males to make crosses in the future and so on. And I kept them in my grandmother's freezer because I knew that she was somebody who she'll never move. Those things will be safe there forever, and I can always go back to them when I need to. So I did. And people who held the clones for Princess and Genius, I owe them words of gratitude and respect for keeping the torch all those years. And so that's the Brothers Grimm history, essentially. I came back in 2015 after over 10-year hiatus after leaving the States and going and living in Europe and just plying my trade as a nuclear engineer and doing something. It's been all my career. When I got out of college, I graduated 86 with my bachelor's and I got my master's in 88 from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, nuclear engineering. I specialized in fluid dynamics and heat transfer and this type of thing. So I was designing the coolant systems for nuclear power plants. So that was my career out of college. And the same year that I graduated, I was offered a job by Super Sativa Seed Club to be a United States distributor of their seeds. And I had, large quantities, a canister of each of the different strains that they offered, so that when the orders came in, I could fill the orders and send to the people who had made the order for. And so it was an exchange like that. So here, imagine I'm a guy getting out of college. I've got my degree, nuclear engineer. I got a job and a corporation in a setting where every day I walk in with a tie, and I'm sitting down at a desk with other engineers in an office and working like a really straight job all day long. I get home and flip on the music and go into the grow room, and I'm growing, and I'm taking envelopes full of cash from Amsterdam and reading whatever instructions are in there, the orders that have come in, and here's your pay. And so what a life. It was like living this double life where my evenings were so different than my day routine that most people, when they go into work in an office like where I was working, the old expression is standing around the water cooler and talking to your colleagues, right? Well, most people would talk about, what they did at home the night before or over the weekend. I couldn't honestly tell these people what I was doing because it was during Prohibition time. This is in the late 80s, let's say 87 to 90, right around that time. And in the state that I was living in wasn't legal. I'm doing all this clandestinely in my basement. And so it was an interesting life to get up and have to be one person and have this sort of true identity underneath it all, Mr. Soul, and growing in the basement, and Rick Campanella, nuclear engineer by day. So it was a fun, different, and it flipped on and off. I went from the one thing more heavily to the other over years as the phases of my life changed. I was married for a 5-year period, the woman who I had my 2 children with. My sons are now, one is nearly 30 and the other was nearly 27 in the next few months. So those two were born of my marriage to their mother that lasted 5 years. And during that time, she was 100% against cannabis and anything. Like, I couldn't be in that business. She made me stop all activities. So that was a strange period of, like going away from what I was used to doing. But then I got right back into it after the divorce, and so then there was an intense period for a while. And then, there's a backing off period. And so I flip-flopped between emphasizing my nuclear engineering career versus my cannabis career, and the melding of the two, is basically who I am. And now I'm 100% doing cannabis, and I've retired from engineering. Thanks to the legalization, I'm able to exist here in Colorado and have Brothers Grimm as a business.
I'm thankful that you stuck with it. Very thankful. So, before you go, what's new on the menu? What's some that you told us you've kind of been working in the kitchen there? What's some of the stuff we might be able to look for here soon?
Well, the most recent one was Grim Glue, where I had a clone that.
By the way, I want to. After the last time you were on, a bunch of the people that were watching ran out and grabbed some. And one of my close friends and a good guy that helps out tons with this show here, Smiley's Gardens, is getting ready to harvest it. He's been bragging long before I even told him you were coming on. He's been talking about this Grim Glue and how excited he is about it. So
it's pretty
he's
exceptional.
Getting ready to harvest it. He's super excited. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Hey, thanks a lot. Yeah, and the listeners, key off of that. I mean, it is some pretty hot stuff. Everybody loves it. It's less of a couch lock effect than the original Gorilla Glue was, and there's more of a woody cedar aroma to it, and it's ultra high resin producer, so very frosty. And people love it. And I'm real proud of it. People are saying to me, this is probably one of the top 3 best things you've ever bred. So that's saying something. And I'm working on a Mac hybrid that, if it ever works, where I could actually make enough seeds to make it work. That's kind of what's in the kitchen right now. You and I talked about it earlier on, and maybe everyone who was listening will remember that the challenges of working with Mac One are they're there, and I'm working with it, and I still feel like at some point I'll create something that we can work with, but for the moment.
You ever thought about a limited release on just the few that you've got there?
We'll see. There's always a possibility. I'll have to do some kind of a special in the next week or so. What holiday's coming up? Thanksgiving? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well, I haven't thought about it because I was recovering over these last couple of months from that horrible attack, and thank goodness I went to the doctor the other day. I've got a clean bill of health. There seems to be no real brain damage. I mean, no more than anybody can. Not that anybody can see my brain right now. I'm just scratching my head, but coincidentally, the attack, really had an incredible impact on the right side of that's my right side, right side of my face, and I definitely felt the effects of having been brain damaged for a while, but it wasn't a brain injury that was temporary and had an effect where my memory was affected and my the lag time in my response to questioning and so on was noticeable. But doctor kind of gave me a clean bill of health a couple days ago, and it's been 6 or 7 weeks since the incident. And thank God I lived through it, and I didn't end up brain dead, and I'm still walking, talking, chewing gum at the same time. But people out there, if I can say anything about it, if you hear any rumors about this whole thing where I was attacked, I was assaulted brutally by an ex-partner who was jealous over a woman, and he's trying to spread lies and make excuses for why he did such a horrible thing to me. But don't believe the bullshit. I can tell you right here and now. It was a unprovoked, horrible attack, and now I find myself the victim of online bullying on top of having been almost killed. So just know that you have a question for me. I'm a good guy. Write me an email. If you have a request or something that I get all the time, emails from folks who are in a bad way. They need some seeds to try to make it. They can't afford it, or something like that. Bring me those kinds of emails and requests, and you'll see what kind of a good dude I am. I mean, I take care of people.
Well, we know that. You don't have to sell that to us. I mean, if you followed you at any point through your career, you would know that.
All right. Well, it's cool, but it's just it's a weird place to be in, especially at my age. I'm not used to having to have petty arguments and people sniping at me and bullying online and things like that. So I think I've said enough about it. I'm happy to be alive. Well, hopefully, that's the main thing.
Well, thank God you're still alive. And, I'm looking forward. Hopefully you'll come back and do this again.
I absolutely will. This is one of my favorite podcasts. I enjoy doing a podcast from time to time, and yours is always, it takes us somewhere. We talk about stuff that I really feel like it was worth the time to do, and it's not just a rehash of a bunch of stuff that I'm always asked,
Well, I was
so thanks a lot, Eagle. I want to talk shit with you again.
I think I've actually got the longest. I'm sorry, sir. I think I am looking at the time. I think I've got the longest Mr. Soul episode out there. So
no doubt.
I'm stoked about that. I don't think you've done an interview this long, so I'm kind of grateful.
I can say that I was genuinely engaged and interested, and I was surprised happily throughout the whole thing that we were always talking about something pretty darn interesting, and the questions were great, and you're a good listener and good interviewer. So please. I would love to come back, and let's stay in touch until then.
All right. Thank you, sir.
All the best. Good night, everybody.
Have a great good night.
Bye-bye.
Mr. Soul. Thank you. Hopefully you guys
Soul
enjoyed
out.
this. Still, you guys, you want me to, there you go. There you go. Hopefully you guys, there's no hope. I know you guys enjoyed this. Thank you guys for tuning in and hanging out with me, Mr. Soul, Brothers Grimm Seeds, of course. One amazing guy, one very, very knowledgeable guy, and very forthright with all the information, man. I just love talking with him. So if you guys are interested, probably do a rabbit hole tonight. If you guys want to come on and hang out, give me a few to get a few things done. I'll pop back on maybe about 20 minutes if you guys are interested. Those of you that are not, well, thank you for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. You know, time is very precious, and I'm grateful for the time that you come here and spend with me. So if you're not going to come hang out, please have an amazing night, amazing day tomorrow. Random acts of kindness do save lives. Please take the time out and at least try to do something nice for somebody tomorrow. It's so easy. Compliments, just help with the door. So easy. Keep that in mind as you go on tomorrow with your travels, and I'll see you in a little bit, about 20 minutes. We'll jump back in for the rabbit hole and see where it goes.